Let's go in the talking room.
While researching topics for her books, author Mary Roach puts the obscure and fascinating stories of science under a spotlight. Her books cover a diverse range of topics, including sex, colonizing Mars, death, and the human alimentary canal. Mary, thanks for being on the talking room. Yay! I'm not sure exactly where to begin with you, but I want to, how does someone grow up to write a series of books about precisely esoteric subjects?
I try to look back at my childhood and figure this out, because people sometimes ask this, and I had the world's dullest childhood. I really had no hobbies or real interests. But little things will pop out, because I would, especially when Stiff came out, people were like, wow, what's wrong with you?
It's dark, right?
Yeah, why? And I do recall that I had, as a kid, I didn't like dolls, but I had a Barbie doll that someone gave me. Mary Hewitt gave me a Barbie doll, and I hated it because it had curly hair you couldn't comb. The only reason I have a Barbie doll is the hair to comb.
Right.
So I hated it. But I would pull the head off, and I would give myself 10 seconds to get the head back on, or she dies. And that's actually kind of accurate. I mean, if you could put a head back on, about 10 seconds, the person, with a little bit of magic involved, the person might be okay. So maybe that was sort of a foreshadowing. I don't know. I was not a science kid.
You weren't a science kid?
I wasn't a science kid. I had, I took the easy science classes in high school. I wasn't nerding out on science. I did my homework. That was it.
And then college, where did you start?
College, although in 6th grade, I went through a phase where the next door neighbors, the Balches, I hung out a lot with them. They were kind of trashy, and we had this, Becky Balch and I had this project. We called it the potted meat experiments. And potted meat was something the Balches, they liked spam, potted meat, Slim Jims.
They called meat product,
right? Yeah,
meat
product, right. Potted meat product. Yes, so it was a spreadable item. And we had this project where we made these little potted meat sandwiches, and we put them out. We hung one from a tree, we buried one in the snow, and we had notebooks in which we took detailed notes. We had no thesis that we were investigating. There was no point to the experiment, but we took careful notes, and we went out and we looked at, there were tracks here, and then one of them was dug up. And so the trappings,
exactly right.
The trappings of science appealed to me, but not the content or the hard work or the math or any, but just being a scientist out in the field was something that appealed to me as a kid.
So that's awesome. I think that those little moments of play when you're a kid totally are the harbingers of what's to come.
Yeah, totally.
So then how did the first book actually start to gel? Was it you were writing articles that were along a certain line?
Yeah. I had a column for Salon.com. Salon.com, I think it's still out there.
Yeah.
But when it started, it was an online magazine. It was very exciting.
I remember.
Ooh, and I had a column for Salon.com, and that was, because they had a lot of, they'd shovel that content every day. So whatever you wanted to write, just go ahead and write it, which was very freeing for me because I'd come from a background of magazines where you had to, you had the demographic, you had this, the subscribers, the advertisers, you had to have a certain tone. And Salon, you're like, I don't care, just give me some shit and we'll put it online and we won't even read it. And so I would go off, I would sort of follow my curiosity off into various strange avenues, and that's what so I had that column, and and there were 2 or 3 cadaver-related columns. One was a Thanksgiving Day piece on how much will the human stomach hold before it bursts.
Which is a lot.
But it depends on if you're dead or alive, because the study I originally found for that.
Who would fill it? Oh, whether the stomach itself is dead or alive.
Yeah, well, or the person. There were some studies that were done where they just propped a dead guy at a table and kind of started filling him up. And the problem with that experiment is that the vomit reflex is out of order, so you can keep, you won't throw up. So normally you're protected by throwing up. That's a safety mechanism.
Right, it's one of the ways. Okay,
it's a safety mechanism to protect your stomach from bursting. So if you don't have that, you can just keep pouring shit in there. Anyway, so
we did that. We did that when we did the Pop Rocks and Soda. We were astonished at how much the stomach, which doesn't feel flexible when you're dealing with it.
That sucker will expand, right?
2-3 times.
Right, yeah, because you're not, when you take the stomach out of the person, you don't have the regurgitation reflex.
Okay, so let's dial into this. Like, where did you get the idea to write about that subject?
Well, it was Thanksgiving, and I, was full, and it was one of those. You just have these questions in your head, and this was before you could go onto Google and ask them and find an answer. So I started. I had that question in my head in the same way that last week when I had a cold, I had this can you get 2 cold viruses at once? Is it possible? Can you, if you have one, are you protected against getting another one?
I'm sure you're not. I'm sure you could get 2 or 3.
But you never do. You know, like, oh, I know I have this one, and now I've got Fred's virus on top of that because I can tell the symptoms. Right. I mean, it seems like you only get one at a time. But anyway, that kind of, I get distracted, and that was one of those situations. And UCSF Med School Library wasn't that far away, and I loved just going to the old, the basement with all the old journals, and you always and I found, of course, there's some old, early 1900s study of where some guy took, well, one was a freestanding stomach, and one he had the actual, it was a German guy, he had the actual cadaver. I like to think that he sat it at a table, put it in a dining room chair. I think he was trying to make it realistic, like the stomach should be sitting up, the posture must be correct.
Wow.
And so
Vesalius, like all mannerists.
Yeah, Kieberg was his name. I dragged that into Gulp for the most recent book. Was that my most? There wasn't.
Yes.
So anyway, those papers, I came across them just, did a PubMed search and found them, and that was one column, and then there was a crash test dummy column. Right,
because they used to use cadavers.
They used the cadavers to calibrate the dummies, because a dummy will just tell you how much G-force, or there's strain gauges and G-force measurements, as you know, that stuff. So but to only have those measurements told you nothing, because you didn't know, well, what will that many G's do? If you slam someone in the sternum with a steering wheel, and you're going to get this much force. But what will that? Was that going to shear the aorta? Is it going to crack the ribs? What's going to happen to a body? So
were they putting?
So they put bodies in just to systematically figure out what does this amount of force do inside a body. They wouldn't put them in crashing.
That's what I was wondering. They wouldn't put them in crashes.
Put a plank, on the accelerator and let her rip. Sadly, they did. They didn't do that.
They would individually test it.
Yeah, they'd put them in a chair, and they'd have like a linear impactor. Like for the one that I saw it was just this piston shoots out, and it was for a T-bone crash, and so it would like slam the cadaver in the shoulder, and they would do 20 miles per hour, 30 miles per hour, like that.
You do cadaver for every one.
You do a different cadaver for every one, and that's tough because the cadavers tend to be old guys. Old people die.
With more brittle bones.
With more brittle bones. And so they'd be waiting and waiting, like, for a young guy, and I would likewise be waiting and waiting for, chapter 3, which is the, automotive safety chapter. I was in this sort of horrible position of, ghoulish position of like, do you think you're going to get any this month? They're like, Mary, come here now. We've got a teenage, I'm like, oh. That's horrible.
This is
anyway.
No, the image that I can't get out of my head is the room full of heads on platters.
The heads. Well,
and that was here in San Francisco, right?
Oh no, the heads were in Texas. Oh. It was the heads were in Texas. That was a plastic reconstructive surgery refresher course that surgeons were taking, and I. Managed to get on the premises, which wasn't easy, because you could imagine if you are running a seminar with 30 severed heads, you don't really necessarily want a person taking notes in a reporter's notebook.
Do they shave them?
They were, they're severed, and I thought, this is unnecessarily ghoulish. Why are you cutting them off? And they're just like, well, that way we can use the body for other things. It would be wasteful. The arms will go over here, and the pancreas will be used in this, and so nothing gets wasted.
The most surprising
yes,
thing...
they shave their heads.
It didn't only just occur to me that they must, because you don't want to have like long curly
flowing.
ringlets
These are really
no.
weird.
The most surprising thing I've learned in doing Mythbusters is how spongy the definition of dead actually is.
Yes.
It's not a...
It's a process.
Right.
And it's the dead point is totally arbitrary, really.
Right.
Yeah.
So do you find yourself, because I certainly do you find yourself when someone says, well, they died at blah, 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 and you're like, well, it's not exactly...
Oh, you know what I hate when people go like, he died instantaneously. I'm like, no, he didn't. There's no way he died like that. First of all, you've got, like even people say like, he was shot in the heart and died instantaneously. Well, there's still going to be, there's a blood circulating. There's still blood in the brain.
Yeah.
It's like I love the guillotine was supposed to be
a humane way to kill people.
Humane way, because it would be instantaneous, unlike the hanging, which was, was really gruesome and unfolded over a matter of seconds or even minutes, whereas the guillotine was supposed to be instantaneous. And then they got the reports from the guys who were up there on the platform going, he looked at me.
Yeah, they move around the eyes and the hands.
Yeah, but when you think of it, it'd be a few seconds where you've got oxygen flowing to the brain and all of the... So
this just occurred to me, actually. I was just thinking, and I was thinking instantaneous. How could you possibly cause an instantaneous death? And I thought, oh, wait a minute. We use trench plates on the show all the time, these 1.5 thick steel plates.
Right.
What if you had like 10 of those stacked on top of 10 and you put someone on it?
Okay, well, instantaneously unconscious and not aware of it, but...
And no systems, I mean,
no
really,
system,
you'd be a pancake, right? So all your systems shut
right.
down in the shortest possible amount of time.
Would it be instantaneous, or would it be 2 or 3 seconds?
I don't think it would be 2 or 3 seconds. I think if you had enough weight on it, you literally could just...
Can you really flatten? Because people... with the horrible stories from 9/11 where people are, and then they'd be splattered. No, because they're going to hit terminal velocity. It doesn't matter how high the building is once they hit terminal velocity.
400 feet.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it doesn't, after that,
it's all the
icing
same.
on the cake or whatever. So, and the bodies tend to be, there's that wonderful or horrible photograph from Life magazine of the woman who jumped from the Empire State Building landing on a car, and she's wearing a dress.
Face is so serene.
Yeah,
and
her legs are crossed like this, and her head's like this, but she's perfectly beautiful.
It's one of the most ghoulish and yet like compelling photographs.
Yeah, and the hood of the roof of the car is
like a Packard, right?
Yeah, and it's indented slightly. She's lying in a sort of a shallow recliner.
So I look at that and I think there's no way she jumped from the top of the Empire State Building. Because the observation deck is about 200 feet from the outer extents of the building.
Aha, yeah. So, I thought you were going to say because she'd be...
No, but you'd have to... She had to have jumped from a window from lower down.
Oh, yeah. Maybe it was like the second floor.
So one of the things I wonder is, I figure you go to the places that you go to, like, get permission to go see the severed heads on a tray, or you go to the body farm. And I would imagine that the people guiding you around, like, the first thing you get is their guest tour.
Oh, yeah.
Right? You get the bullshit tour.
Right.
So how do you get the deeper tour than that?
It's even worse. What they want to do now, they want to give you the PowerPoint tour. So I have a zero tolerance policy for PowerPoint.
So they'll put you in a conference room?
They want to put you in a room. Now, this is what happens. So I up front, I'm like, I just got to let you know, I have a zero tolerance policy for PowerPoint. You will not be showing me. But I think it will help you. I really think it. No, you put that away right now. You close that laptop because we're not going to. So, it's you really need to just stay for a while. You got to
more than a day.
More than a day, because you come back the second day, and that's when things are more real,
right?
And therefore more interesting. It doesn't have to be a whole day. Like I was years ago reporting on sushi and parasites, and I was in Tokyo at the sushi school that is right down the block, coincidentally, from a museum of parasitology. So all of the worms that you could get from sushi, they're all lovingly displayed in this. It's a 4-story, wonderfully tidy and amazing parasite museum.
Are they all done in perfect depictions, like the way the sushi looks perfect in the window, the plastic sushi?
And in fact, I'm on my key ring even now. I have a little, it's an anisakid worm in a little piece of lucite or whatever that stuff that you put. It's a little tiny. So yes, and they have the gift shop, which is quite excellent. But what we're
the sushi school.
So okay, yeah. So the Parasite Museum, the Parasite Museum of Parasitology, they have it's all very nicely set out and all these displays and everything. But I'm like, okay, that's fine. And I went through the sort of the tour, but then I hung around, and after about an hour and a half, the director, I guess, felt fondly towards me because he said, "Would you like to see the whale tapeworm?"
Oh my gosh!
And the whale tapeworm was in another room. It was like in the back behind another door.
So the tapeworm of a whale, or is it called? Okay.
Yeah, no, it's the tapeworm that they got from a whale. And I guess it was like, do you ever seen those fire hoses that are hanging on the wall in the hallway? It was like that, and they had carefully folded it, and it really did look like that. In my head, I think I've got it sort of mixed up with an actual fire hose, but it was that big, and they got it out in one piece, which was astounding. But he wasn't gonna, if I hadn't hung around way past the amount of time that was allotted me and outstayed my welcome, I wouldn't have seen the whale tapeworm, which was really the spectacular highlight of the day. And
I would imagine that on that first tour, they're talking about stuff that they think outside people would be interested in.
That's right.
But they're not going to reveal the good stuff because they don't think it's interesting to the good civilians.
Stuff.
Right.
Yeah, they have no idea it's the good stuff. They have a sense of the highlight reel that the public wants to see, but I'm not, by anyone's definition, the public.
Wait, so is there a point at which you ask a question where you can see the thing turn in their head where they're like, oh, this is totally different, let me go to a different level?
Not a lot of times what you have to do is I have to do is be very direct and say, I am looking for things that are visual and very specifically. What I try to do before I go is send them one of my books.
Right.
So then they'll know the kind of warped person that I am.
Yeah.
Or the kind of interests that I have. So I want to try to help them guide me to things that I might find interesting. But sometimes I just have to say, what's the weirdest shit you've ever seen or done, or what's back here? What's in that closet?
Right.
Or what's in the basement? Or, but sometimes it's just hanging around because these things just kind of come up. But people I don't teach journalism, but sometimes I go to people's classes, and the only thing I have to say to people is don't come in with a list of questions, because the questions that you need to ask, you don't know how to ask.
Right.
And the answers are that you want are not the answers you want. You gotta let the person you're talking to kind of take you there. So don't keep reining them into your list of questions. You got to let the narrative unfold. Yeah, you don't know the half of it's whatever this person's world is. It's so much more interesting than you could ever imagine. So for you to try to imagine what's interesting, you're going to only get like a quarter of the way there. So let them take you. You got to steer them.
I have learned as I've learned as I go to museums and get backstage tours, not to bring my family anymore. Mm-hmm. Because do you know Mark Seidel at the Museum of Natural History? He's the leech guy.
No. Oh.
You'd like him.
Yeah.
And he gave me a backstage tour of the Museum of Natural History in New York.
Yeah.
My kids and my mom and my wife still talk about it. It's like, oh, that 5-hour tour. But I had an amazing time because we went into the oldest building, the first building, which is the 3-story glass-floored library.
Wow.
And it's glass-floored because they only had natural light, and you needed to let the sunlight filter to the bottom.
The Wesleyan University, the stacks have glass floors, and I always wondered about that.
That turns out to be the reason. It's the Victorian solution.
Beautiful.
And way up at the top is this attic room full of elephant skulls, because there are people all over the world who like, well, the Museum of Natural History must want this, and so they take it, but they don't need it anymore.
Yeah,
and they've got like
yeah.
50 elephant skulls up there.
The Smithsonian has entire warehouses of stuff. And the thing that's illustrative is that if you go to the Smithsonian, the stuff they've chosen to put on display often is, to my mind, the least interesting stuff. Like I don't know why, for Bonk, I think it was for Bonk, I was somehow needing to talk to someone about bacula, or penis bones. Yeah. And as it turns out, the Smithsonian has a tremendous, huge collection of bacula, penis bones, but they're not. I'm like, well, where is it? What floor? Oh, that's in a warehouse in Virginia. I'm like, are you kidding me? You don't have the penis bones on display? They're like, yeah, we don't even know. They're somewhere. And then they say, oh, we've also got the wet specimen collection. I'm like, whoa. Back it up. The wet specimen collection. Yeah, so the Smithsonian has this tremendous genitalia of the animal kingdom collection. I don't know where they got it, but they don't. That's not on display.
That's not on display.
Yeah.
Will you, up in my office, on the bookshelf with all the stuff is the samurai sword, and in the front of the samurai sword is a bone. Would you bring that?
I guess I know what this is.
It's the weirdest prop replica I've ever made, and I want to show it to you.
Okay.
Because this was, when I was getting the tour of the Museum of Natural History, they had a walrus bacula.
Yes.
Which had been used as a pointer by a professor for decades. Yeah. And written on it was used as a pointer, and in this careful pen. Yeah. So I took pictures and measurements of it.
Oh, wow.
And eventually found the perfect. Well, there are replicas you can buy from bone clones, walrus bacula, but they're terrible. This one is an exact replica, and I even wrote on it, "Walrus baculum used as a pointer when giving lectures, William King Gregory." So this is that's my strangest prop replica ever.
This is a replica?
No, this is a real walrus bone.
Oh, all right. I was going to say this is a hell of a replica.
It's very, very close in size and shape and form to the one at the museum's collection.
I have a baculum that supposedly is a walrus baculum, but it must have been a little guy or a really kind of insecure guy, because it's about that big. And I would take it. I took it sometimes on speaking tours, and when somebody had a question, they had to the baculum would be pressed, and they have to hold the talking baculum, because I had this bone and I wanted to use it more. Yes. So I take it, and it's portable. I mean, mine is only, and it's really more, it looks like that. And now I'm thinking, I wonder if I have a seal baculum that was sold as a walrus baculum, because I bet you get that a lot.
People misidentify bones all the time.
Yeah, I'm guessing what I have is just like a harbor seal piece bone, and I've been going around because they supposedly were used as war clubs.
Really?
Yeah, the Inuit, Eskimo Inuit would supposedly use them as war clubs, and this was also confusing to me because mine's this big, and I'm picturing these guys like.
But this I could that would be quite useful.
Yeah, and they're probably pretty strong. Yeah, that's a very handsome.
Isn't it? It's excellent. It's excellent.
I have a rat baculum. It's tiny. It looks like something you kind of like a fish bone that you kind of get caught in your teeth or something. I interviewed this woman at Cornell who studies bacula and what the function is, because they're useful for taxonomy. You can sort of tell, you can differentiate between species by this one has a trident and this one has there's some really weird looking ones, but they're not connected to they're sort of free floating bones, so they're not supporting in a way that bones normally do. And so she was a bioengineering,
looking at the musculature and how it actually.
Yeah, they were looking at like what exactly do they do? What is the point of a penis bone?
I would imagine that in a rat that would be difficult to ferret out. No pun intended.
Yes, exactly. She had she was gluing little tiny like strain gauges to this, and at one point her husband called and they were discussing what's for dinner, and she's like, yeah, I've got the penis here, and she's had this wonderful conversation with her about what's for dinner as she's gluing the strain gauge and then about to like.
Not onto a live rat.
No, okay. No rats were harmed or.
Is it
made
getting easier?
uncomfortable.
Do people now seek you out to tell you the weird stuff they're working on?
They don't, and I wish they would seek me out more. I mean, they've become more welcoming.
Yeah.
So, because if they've seen or read one of the books, which could have gone either way. I actually had a fear initially that people would just run as fast as they could from me because they didn't know how they were going to be portrayed, or if I I wouldn't or I would oversimplify, or I
They would worry that you'd oversimplify.
Yeah, they would worry that what they found important about their work wouldn't be portrayed because I would zero in on the weird shit. Like,
right.
You know, I wouldn't portray their world the same way they see it. But that hasn't been the case at all. People have been incredibly welcoming and friendly, though not calling up and going, "You need to get down here."
But I would imagine that now that you show up, like somebody who's read one of your books might know to sort of pull back the curtain a little earlier.
You would think, but not so much. No, I know. No, people are going more and more toward. Well, I've got this PowerPoint, and that seems to be what people like to see.
Wow.
And that, you know, sometimes I'll sit through a PowerPoint if it's sort of technical stuff, and it saves them having to run me through the basics because I show up an ignoramus for the most part, and I don't have a background in science, so I'm tending to use them as unpaid tutors.
Right.
So the whole first half of the day is like, can you explain how that works? Or, so the PowerPoint may work for that, but.
We find that when we show up, we say, we'd like to interview you, and they always find us a blank-walled, empty, white conference room to do the interview. And we say, we'd actually rather be in a lab.
Yeah.
We'd rather be in a lab or someplace really messy.
Yeah.
Like, this looks terrible.
Yeah.
No. On camera, it's going to look great.
Yeah. I found that Japan was most difficult for that. Everything would happen in a little empty conference room. Any conversation, any interview. You know, you'd be in some really. I was doing some story on the culture of cute. You know, Hello Kitty, and there are all these other different companies that generate these little characters and things. And they have these wonderful, messy, workbenches with the little characters and models. And they'd go, okay, now we're going to pull you from this interesting scene and put you with the person you want to talk to in a blank, dull room, and with an interpreter. And no matter what I would do, they're like, no, we really. Now we're going to this room. I don't want to go to the room. I don't want to go to the blank room.
I wanted to talk about this because it's our first meeting, our first lunch. You and Jamie and I got together over here in the Mission. And I told you a fact that you said if you could corroborate it might end up in Gulp.
Okay.
But you weren't able to corroborate it. But I wanted to talk about it. And it was that it was at that point W was our president, right?
Yes.
George W. And the fact that I'd heard is that the president's poop is a state secret.
Yes.
That they bag and tag it. He goes with a special toilet. And this is specifically because the U.S. government gets all sorts of information on foreign dignitaries by bagging and tagging their waste in the
they
government
put
bathrooms.
little strainers or catches in the toilet.
Because you can determine a lot about someone from their poop.
You could get DNA.
Right.
You get the DNA. You could do a whole genetic run.
Do they have cancer? Are they actually related to their children? All sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
So it seems to me totally reasonable. If I was part of the Secret Service, I'd be like, absolutely, we can't let the president poop in an unauthorized toilet.
Yeah, and I spoke to people who you would think you would know who were not able to really
Confirm
verify
or deny.
that there was a detail of that there were people working undercover in the top hotels, like when the dignitaries would come, putting the catch, the trap in the toilet, and then coming and taking it out. That I could not verify.
I want to know. I mean,
I do too. I even have, you know what I have on a sticky on the side of my file cabinet, the phone number for the Secret Service Public Affairs Office. I never bother to call because the Secret Service, the Public Affairs people are like, they're not going to say, I mean, this is why they're secret. They don't blab to just anybody about it. Because then, of course, people are going to be hip to the fact that they're putting the little sieve.
So what are they going to do? They're going to poop in the sink.
They're going to poop
Who's
in a little jar.
Who's going to chastise the foreign king for pooping in the sink?
For pooping in the sink. Or his own little jar, which is then taken out in the middle of the night and disposed of in the dumpster in the back alley.
I still like to think that it's totally true.
I think there was a long chain on Reddit, which you sent to me. Wasn't there? Someone was claiming that it's true, but it wasn't something I could verify.
Really? A Reddit story that's unverified?
Yeah. Weird. Reddit had a great chain on, I'm sure you've heard this, that in Germany, the toilets have a viewing platform.
No.
You never heard this?
No.
It's a little shelf so that instead of going down into the water, it remains on a sort of a dais so that you can do a closer inspection. And there was this long, people writing in going, actually, it's not a German thing. It's all over Eastern Europe, and there were a couple theories, and one of them, the one I liked best, was these are the sausage-eating nations. There was a lot of trichinosis. There was a lot of worms. So people were looking. They weren't just sort of going, that's a fine one. I feel good about that one. It was really for looking for worms. So that was, but just, God love Reddit, just a long, long chain of people.
People take that genuinely seriously.
Who
and
know a lot
it.
about a certain time frame and the toilets of Eastern Europe and why they may or may not have had this shelf.
Wow.
Yeah.
I have still never gotten up the nerve to try a bidet at this point.
Oh, yeah. It's a ladies' item, isn't it, Adam?
Well, no. Japanese toilets now.
Yeah. Well, the Japanese, the spraying one.
Yes.
And I have to tell you, because I was in the Toto R&D Center, which they have it's 5 stories, and each...
I've heard about this, the toilet building. The
toilet building, the Toto toilet showroom, and then there's also the R&D, and I've been to both, of course. But there's 5 stories, and each one has a different bathroom done up with the latest Toto models. And the year that I went, this was the Salon column, 90s, sometime in the late 90s, it was a washlet before they sort of had caught on. And it was a Japanese only control panel. Of course, in Japan, anytime you can push a button, you push a button.
Right.
And this one was the spray jet. And so the spray jet comes out, which I was startled. I didn't know. And so I got up and I'm looking down, and it gets you, of course, in the face. So you need to stay seated, first of all. But second of all, there's a pulsation option. And that thing hits you just where you know they meant it to. And I know why Japanese housewives love this toilet.
Do they use, in the R&D, do they use prosthetic butts? I'm wondering, is there a...
They use mimic waste.
Mimic waste,
yeah,
right.
The guy came over and I said, how are you testing this? Because I know golf balls are sometimes, ping pong balls, they use golf balls for testing the ability of the toilet to, and this was a project they were looking into, it was a coating to prevent skid marks. And I said, how do you test this? How are you having people with different qualities of come in, and he went away and came back with this, I think it was a glass container, and he handed it to me and said, mimic waste, which took me like 3 or 4 repetitions.
Right.
What is he? Oh, mimic waste. And it was high fidelity fecal simulant, which NASA has also had to do.
We have made some on the show.
I know you have, and it was blue.
It was blue, and Jamie
it hit the fan.
Jamie did not want to make it blue. He wanted to make it brown, and he wanted to make it edible, and he wanted to eat it on camera. And we were like, you can't do that. And he was like, oh, I don't understand why I can't. And I was like, because no, I'm not even going to entertain this discussion with you.
Why was it blue again?
We just made it blue so that you could stomach watching it.
Oh, okay. You know the blue toilet, the Tidy Bowl blue?
Yeah.
That was apparently, originally, it was done so that you knew, when it was running out. And you knew when to change it.
Oh, right. Okay. The color would get lighter.
The color would get lighter, but people loved the blue so much.
The blue feels clean.
Yes, that they kept it just a steady blue.
Do you know this is a problem that detergent companies are having? So you know the detergent companies actually slightly color their detergent slight blue tinge because it looks whiter and brighter.
To make the whites whiter.
Right.
And the brights brighter, yeah.
But now that we're all using LEDs in our houses, they have a different color temperature, and thus the detergents aren't looking as white under LED lights.
Right. I love this. The stuff that people, like how do you How do you test that, and how do you have to adjust that?
Right, you're a detergent company. You don't think your formula of color is something you're going to have to
God, we're going to
ship.
have to go back and redo this. Oh, God damn it.
So how often when you're researching a book do you come across facts that you'd love to put in, but because you can't corroborate, you have to leave it out? That sounds like a whole book in and of itself.
Yeah. Usually you can corroborate. It's like something like The Secret Service, where it's a secret.
Right.
And either you can't trust the person, or you know, that's usually the only time. Usually you can find, sometimes it's a matter of going, you know, just finding someone else. You can usually find somebody who's willing. Like here was an example that for the toilet zero gravity defecation chapter, which I'm quite proud of.
I'm one of my favorite chapters.
That chapter. There was a photograph from the Apollo era. They didn't have a toilet. They had a bag, okay? It's just a bag.
I've pooped in a bag. It's very undignified.
Bag, and it had the little finger caught to kind of, because it's zero gravity, and you had to nudge it. You know, gravity was not your friend. You didn't have gravity for good separation. So you had to kind of nudge it into the bag. And NASA has there's a photograph from the Apollo era. And this is a very 1970s or late 60s. It's a guy, and you can't see the guy. It's just like from here, and the guy's he's fully clothed. It's some guy at NASA, and he's got, you know, this kind of puffy silk shirt with cufflinks and plaid pants, tight-fitting plaid pants, and he's holding and a pinky ring, and I'm like, who's that guy? And first the guy goes, well, there's speculation. There's speculation. And I'm like, I know you're going to cave by the end of the day. You're going to tell me who that was. But like you can always get the answer, usually.
Right.
Sometimes, like with the cosmonauts, it's very easy because a bottle of whiskey comes out at 10 in the morning, and you know, they'll, I have a chapter on zero gravity intercourse. NASA doesn't like to talk about it. Astronauts are happy to talk about it with each other, but they don't want to talk to you. Not because they're prudish, but they're like, because then I'm going to be the go-to guy.
Right.
Everyone's going to call me about zero gravity sex, so I'm not talking about it. But the cosmonauts,
they don't mind,
were so open about it. They were, I think even without the 10 o'clock shots of whiskey at the museum of, what was it, the museum? It was the Cosmonaut Museum. Anyway. They were so much so that we were talking about, because I was saying, what if someone died on a Mars mission? Would you just put the body outside? Would you bring the body back? How do you handle death? And I was asking all these questions, and this guy, Sasha, goes, Mary, can we talk about sex again? This is too dark. So they were delighted to talk about sex. So sometimes it just means like getting on a plane and going to Star City to have a conversation instead of trying to do it here. But you can usually get it. That was a really roundabout way of answering your question. But you can usually get an answer.
I've noticed, though, that, I mean, we had to deal with NASA a couple of times, and they're very, 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 very skittish. Mm-hmm. So your book must have freaked them out on every level. Packing for Mars must have upset them.
Packing for Mars was, they were, skittish about things that I found. In particular, they had a cadaver study. This was when Constellation, we were going to go back to the moon and build a base, and they were the capsule that was going to ferry the crew back and forth. They were doing some crash tests because if the capsule came down on its side instead of straight down, you know, was it going to be was the crash going to, was the suit, the hard parts of the suit, were they going to break bones? So they couldn't do that on an automobile with crash test dummies. It's a very specific scenario. So they were doing cadaver testing, and I'm like, Mary Roach needs to be there. Obvious to me. And but they were for months and months, and they didn't say, you know, the answer is no. They said, I think the Constellation people are uncomfortable. And so they led me on this wild goose chase where I'd call the Constellation people. They're like, no, hell no, we're happy to have you there. And then they're like, no, it's the people at Ohio State. They really don't want you there. I'm like, I know John Bolte. I've been to his lab. He loves my book. Okay, so it's not, it's actually Did we say Ohio State? We meant headquarters. They don't want to. And so I went around and around, and finally, John Bolte he goes, Mary, just show up.
Right.
Just show up. So I do. I show up, and I'm like, hi, nice to meet you. The NASA guys are there like, hi, who are you? And I'm like, I'm Mary Roach. And they were like, that name is familiar. I said, what? I'm like, yeah, I'm writing a book. And they're like, run down. They run from the office down to where the students are wiring up the cadaver, and they say, don't speak to her. And then they run in and they call NASA Public Affairs Johnson Space Center, and they get this woman, Lynette Madison, who has given me the runaround for 6 months on this. And they go, Mary Roach is here. And Lynette goes, Mary Roach is there. Oh, just talk to her. And so
good.
So it all worked out.
But I mean, let's talk about
But I kept saying, why are you uncomfortable? You're doing, first of all, these are people who've donated their bodies to science. They want to be useful. They get to wear a spacesuit, kind of. That's cool. To be dead and dressed up in a spacesuit, how cool is that? Why would the families mind? And why are you, this is a really, it's a good thing. You're concerned about the crew's safety. You're trying to make sure that they're not going to get hurt. Why are you, if you act like you have something to hide, people will think you have something to hide.
But I've been told I've been told one of the reasons they're so skittish is, well, because we have a government that politicizes and denigrates science frequently, and NASA considers anything they did that was controversial will affect the dollars that they get instantly.
That's right. That's right.
And
if there's someone who hears that they took a cadaver and they hit it in the arm,
and that will somehow trivialize what they're doing.
Well, taxpayer dollars were used. Yeah, so that is their concern.
And
also,
it's crazy.
It is crazy.
When we first we did a thing with Chris Hadfield on Tested.
Yeah.
And when we first started discussing what we could do,
the
first thing I said was, you remember how we met? You wrote to me and said you were working on packing for Mars, and you were looking into whether or not an astronaut zero-G, if he farted really loudly or significantly, could he propel himself forward?
Yes, could he launch himself across the middeck, which is the exact words I had heard.
And that was, as soon as we started talking to Chris, that's the first thing I wanted to test. And Chris is totally into it. By the way,
some guy actually did try it.
So I've heard a Russian, right?
No, it was no. It was I interviewed. It wasn't Mullane. He's in the book. I interviewed him. And he said, well, I had it didn't work, but I had clothes on, and I think that might have interfered.
Sure.
And the next time I was in space, it was not an all-male crew, and I didn't feel I could strip down naked, fart loudly, and test it again.
But the ISS is big. Couldn't you be in another section?
It was a shuttle. It was a shuttle.
Oh, okay. That's tiny.
Yeah. So there was a homemade project, but they said no.
They said absolutely no. They didn't want it to be trivialized, and they didn't want to give the impression that we were wasting the astronauts' time doing something trivial.
Yeah. Well, Hadfield. If Hadfield wanted to do it, you'd think they would let him, because he has single-handedly made space and NASA cool and interesting.
And he did a lot, and
he has done such a great job.
Really?
Because the Public Affairs Office, I don't know why or how, but they managed for decades to make space dull.
Right, and they've done it by trying not to make it controversial because of that fear.
Because
and
of that
it's
fear.
so sad.
I know, but I understand that. The public affairs people they've got a job to do. This is what they've been told. You look at the number of hits Chris Hadfield gets, you go, see, this is, people find this cool, and you don't, anyway,
It's a total shame.
So you were going to try to do it.
We were going to try and do it, and he was totally game. We were going to have him put a gauge up on the wall. And it couldn't.
Because for a while they weren't flying beans, but beans are back on the menu.
Well, and we actually used some of their beans. Traci de Jardins constructed what Chris referred to as this Traci Spacey burrito, which used beans to glue things to the tortilla so that you could
so they don't float off. Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And it turns out to now be a frequently enjoyed item on the ISS.
Yeah, because beans and beans were forbidden not because of the stink, but because there was a concern about flammability, hydrogen. So early on, because Michael Levitt, this guy I interviewed, who is
it would take a lot.
It would, exactly. But they were thinking a capsule. It's a small space. You got two guys.
Oh,
would
it would also
reach-
stay localized because your
Yes.
wind currents wouldn't be the same. Right.
So there was a concern that the hydrogen might reach a concentration where you had to worry about explosion. And Michael Levitt was on retainer. He was for many years the flatulence guy. Published 32 papers on flatus, flatulence, etc. And he said, yeah, they had me on retainer. They kind of they'd fly me into town every now and then, and a limo would pick me up. It was pretty great. But he goes, all I basically did is tell them, no, don't worry about it.
How often do you finish a book and then someone comes at you with a story that you wish could go in?
Oh, all the time. I mean, when Stiff came out, I just had missed. Body Worlds was just getting rolling. I wanted to go because Von Hagens has a cadaver sweatshop going on at Dalian in China. Well, there's also some in Eastern Europe, but and
there's two different people, right? Or is it?
Well, there's Von Hagens, and there's also the guy Michigan, Roy Glover.
One of them was leaking.
Oh, there's three.
Oh,
there's
okay.
Roy Glover, Von Hagens, and the Leaky People.
Right.
The Leaky People. Someone wanted me to come and do a book talk at the what is the name of the leaking one that was
remember,
here in
but
town.
I just remember here it was like,
yeah, and they were leaking from the genitals. I mean, it was a bad scene. They're like, "Would you like to come and do a book talk?" And part of me wanted to go, "Yeah," just because I really want. It's just a train wreck. But Von Hagens was the original guy, and he has a huge operation, and I wanted to go, but it came. I heard about it just as the book was going to press. And similarly, that operation that turns bodies into diamonds, I was very curious to see how that works. How much material do you need? How do they do the pressure?
Yeah.
And then, how much are they worth?
Right.
I mean, they shitty diamonds? Can you take it to a pawn shop and get? Are they brown and
It's
ugly?
body diamond. I won't buy.
I won't buy. It's worthless. Yeah, I had a lot of questions about that, and I couldn't. It was too late. So that happens all the time.
So when you're I guess past the halfway point in it, well, within a book, you choose the rubric that you're going to write under, and then as you start to look at stuff, I'm sure that all the time you're like, wow, I never thought of it that way. Like you come to that part. But is there points where your opinion of something gets changed 180 degrees? Like I was always looking at that totally wrong.
Yeah, all the time. I write a book proposal that makes it sound as though I know something. Right. And I think it's going to be about these various things. And then even further along when I start a chapter, I don't really know what this is about. Right. And I'll report the chapter and go, "Oh, okay, this is a chapter about." It's not about the topic. It's not about the subject matter. It's actually about. I need an example to make this clear, but it happens a lot. And my books bear no resemblance to the book proposal.
That's what I was going to ask.
Absolutely. And people sometimes say, "Oh, could you send me a copy of your book proposal, so I know how to do it?" I'm like, "I'm going to tell you how to do it. Think of the most amazing chapters you could ever imagine. Never mind that." They may not be doable. They may not exist. Just put them down on paper because you're not going to know. You don't know anything unless you spend 2 years researching a topic before you write a proposal. But who does that? So just throw it down there. It's a marketing tool. Yeah. Just get them excited, and promise them everything because it's not going to. There's no resemblance.
And they don't mind.
Unless you turn in something awful where they want to kill it, then they can go back and say you didn't deliver, and it's a contractual issue. Right. If you turn in something, presumably it's going to get better because the more you know, the more you can fine tune and leave out the duller stuff and go to something fresher and more bizarre or interesting.
Well, I would imagine whole chapters show up.
Whole chapters show up. Yeah, just last week I added two things. I thought I knew what the whole outline was. I keep outlines because they crack me up because every outline I write, I think, okay, I know what the book's going to be. I got it all sketched out. Literally, especially in the first 6 months, like every 2 weeks, I completely throw away an outline.
That's awesome.
Do a new one, and every time I'm convinced I know what this book's going to be, and then I look and I keep them all so I can look back and laugh.
That's really useful. I mean, that's it would
be interesting if
a lot of people keep themselves from writing out something because they think, oh, I don't have it fully formed or anything, but it's going to take its own shape.
Yeah. It's definitely going to take its own shape. And I also, you got to start writing, even though you don't know where it's going to fit in the overall structure. I mean, the whole thing is changing up for like the first year. It's very amoebic.
What is your actual practice of writing? Do you try a fidelity of writing a certain amount every single day, or is it
Bonk.
bit by bit? I mean, let's say you're in Texas visiting some facility. Are you writing? You're writing notes every night of.
I mean, I'm taking notes from. I transcribe. If I have a tape recorder, I'm transcribing, and I'm gathering notes, and I amass this pile of material. Some of it, from old strange books. Some of it from interviews. And when I have the pile, as soon as I have the pile, and I'm pretty certain there's not going to be a lot more to go into that chapter, I start writing, even though I don't know how it's going to fit into the whole book. And I write, I tend to just dick around on email and catching up with stuff in the morning, and usually in the afternoon I kind of just force myself to sit down, and 3 or so hours of actual writing happens late in the day after New York is gone, after most of the rest of the country is unemailable.
Right.
So I can't, so I don't have the excuse, because I love to write, but I hate to. And I put it off because I think I don't want to write, but then once I'm in it, I love it.
Yeah.
Kind of like taking a shower. I don't ever want to. I'm like, I'll take a shower tomorrow. I don't really want to take. And my husband's always like, "Don't you love taking showers?" Yes, once I'm in the water, I love being in the shower. Seems like a lot of work to go.
Yeah, I'm totally with you.
But I'm like, I'm gonna like get undressed, and I don't feel like taking a shower.
It's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work. But then I'm in there and I can't get out. So that's the same with writing. I'm in there and I can't get out.
I assume that when you get interested in this subject, you do some research and you call the lab that's in charge of that. But I would also imagine that there are times when the route to finding the right person is much more circuitous and strange.
Yeah, usually, really? Yeah. It's
or you visit a place only to find that I'm not at the right place, and they've got to point you to. Yeah.
Hopefully you've pinpointed the right place before you get on the plane, but not always. I mean, I do myself a disservice by being overly optimistic and thinking I have this image of this lab that's going to be just really cool and interesting. Like when I wrote for Discover, I was constantly pitching stories like, well, I found this lab where they study the ergonomics of airplane seats. So they've got these people like sitting and standing, and it's just like asses in chairs, and they're like, okay, go do it. And you get there, and it's just an airplane seat, and you sit in it for 8 hours and read, and then fill out a questionnaire. It's kind of,
and that's it.
But of course, that's what it is. Why would there be like, because I get every now and then such things do exist. Like there's this book by Jerry Della Femina, who was in the advertising industry in the 60s, when Think Small and all, like really amazing, when advertising was a really interesting, the Mad Men era. And he wrote this memoir, he had this line about, because he represented the Tampax company, and they would test tampons using this thing called the Syngina. And he had this great line where he said, and if you did a really good job on your pitch, you got to take the Syngina to lunch. So I'm always thinking, there's going to be a Syngina. There's going to be some, or I'll see something on paper like a machine called the Shirley Stiffness Tester, which is, there is such a thing called the Shirley Stiffness Tester. It's for testing fabrics, the stiffness, and probably Mr. Shirley invented it. There was one for Gulp. There was a device called the tongue camera. And I'm just like, I've got to go. I'll get on a plane and go all the way to the Netherlands just because there's something called the tongue camera. Yeah. There was another sort of chew-o-matic. It was some chewing device. And you get there, and it's like, you want us to wire you up to the chew-o-matic? Okay, it's going to take about half an hour. And
it's literally a camera you wear in your tongue?
Well, the tongue camera is really just an ultra close-up, like a person sticking their tongue out. It's not really. It's a tongue camera. What did you think it was going to? I don't know. I have an overactive imagination sometimes. I think it's going to be
it must be entertaining to sit next to you on the plane where someone says, "And why are you heading to the
Why are
Netherlands?"
you heading to the Netherlands? Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
And is there, in one of your books, is there something that you've come across that forever after that changed the way you did something?
Something that forever after changed the... Oh, yeah, well...
Like made you... Like, for instance, I've become semi-germophobic after I shake hands with 75 people. And I have this whole...
Oh, yes.
Like
well,
when I used to play pool,
yeah.
I never held a drink with my bridge hand because you don't want to get it wet. So I still never hold drinks in my left hand.
Right.
And now after I shake hands with 50 people, I make very clear, touch your face with your left hand, shake hands with the right.
I'm absolutely... Having spent time... We had this Chuck Gerba, who's a microbiologist of specifically kitchens and bathrooms, and he's the one who taught me about aerosolization.
Oh, gosh.
He has footage, amazing camera, photographs of, it looks like the 4th of July, stuff coming out of the toilet.
Oh, man. And how did he get that?
I don't remember. I don't know. It's really great, though. And he showed me, and Chuck Gerba, you would love Chuck Gerba.
Talk.
And and to sterilize the toilet seats, he would pour alcohol on them and light them, he'd have his kids would be like, "We're going to set the toilet on fire," and they'd turn out the lights, and set it on fire with this blue ring of flame to sterilize the seats. And he had a way of photographing, the stuff coming out. And so now, because I know about aerosolization, and I said, "Well, you just close the toilet seat, big deal." He goes, "No, because when you lift it up, it pulls up, so you get the next person, if you have the lid shut, the next person who comes along, when they open it up, it all kind of comes out. It can
remain airborne that long.
Yeah, and and I said, "So, big deal, what are you going to get?" He goes, "Actually, we took polio virus, and we implanted it in turds, basically, and we suspended mice in little cages at various distances from the toilet, and we flushed the toilet, and there was actual polio virus, some of the mice..." Fecal coliform, it's everywhere. It's everywhere you want to be, fecal coliform. And so what? For the most part, unless the person is sick, it's like not. But cold viruses and flus will get transferred that way. You're shedding virus in your shit.
That cold and flu transmission is totally astonishing.
Fomites, that's a fun word a fomite is a table or a glass. It's a surface fomite is the main route of transmission.
Really?
For cold and flu viruses, it's not.
Bodily fluids or shaking hands or sneezing.
It is indirectly. You sneeze into your hand and you touch this, and now the next person touches it and touches their eye. But it's not usually direct. Like drinking from the glass of somebody, it's touching the glass as much as it is drinking. It's not saliva isn't a good way. Kissing someone is not the best way to spread it. It's actually, and you know how the Common Cold Unit figured this out? This was so great. They had 2 different rooms, 2 different experimental settings. One of them, they had people with a cold virus, part of them. They had them play poker. So you're picking up, so you're constantly picking up chips and cards and transferring germs that way. Yeah. And those are the people who transferred flu, not, I forget what the other experimental setting was. But anyway, they figured out that, touching where, like a doorknob. So I'm always pushing elevator buttons. Like, I'm not a germ-phobic person. I'm a filthy, gross person, as you know. But I don't want to get a cold or a flu. No. I hate getting the cold or flu. I had just getting over a cold. So I'm always doing this.
One of the researchers had a test subject French kiss a bunch of people with a cold, and they didn't get one.
Right. Kissing is, and it's counterintuitive, but it's true. It's all like touching the doorknob, and it's very hard to not touch your eye or pick your nose. That someone else did a study where they actually counted the number of times. It was an amphitheater. It was a grand rounds, all these medical doctors sitting, and they had someone who supposedly was a guest observer who was like making little marks. Like every time someone picked their nose. So science knows the nose-picking rate, and it's higher than you would think.
My friend Sarah used to have, in high school, she and her group of friends had a challenge every day. And they would just come up with random, weird challenges. You got to do this, you got to do that. And surprisingly, just on the spur of the moment, they came up with one that turned out to be the most difficult one ever, which was don't touch your face today.
It's really hard.
It's a nightmare. Yeah, the moment you think about it, forget about it. Your whole face just starts itching.
Yeah, and you try to do that thing, I'll touch my face with my left hand. Like in India, you eat with one hand and you wipe with the other. It's very hard to do that unless you're culture is. I mean, if you've grown up that way.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So we did a cold test dinner on MythBusters where we used a fluorescing liquid that leaked from the side of my nose, so that I had to deal with it all the time.
Yeah.
And at the end of it, we put the whole table under black light, and it was a horror show.
Oh yeah.
Everything was covered.
Yeah.
And I was the only source of the fluorescent liquid.
Yeah, there was some study where they looked at the square footage that's touched by a baby in a house.
Oh my God.
They're touching everything and putting it in their noses and mouths.
That just becomes when you have children, they're petri dishes.
They
come home
exactly. Yep.
We get colds all the time.
Yeah.
So I found from our research, the one thing that I don't do is I try always to grab the handle of the bathroom door with tissues in my hand.
Oh yes. Right.
Somebody pointed out. They said, and then you throw it in the garbage can right there. And Matt Lauer, who's a total germaphobe, said, "What if there isn't a garbage can?" He said, "If we all throw our napkins, or
people do, they throw it on the ground.
Put a garbage can there eventually."
I try to pull the door, like the refrigerator at our office. I try to, in cold season, pull it at the very bottom rather than the top.
Right. Yes.
Just because
I do too.
Yeah.
So your husband, Ed.
Yes.
Is there a point in each book where he just says, "We have to stop taking your work home"?
Well, there's definitely been a point. Well, yeah, 2 books in particular. Bonk, we don't need to get into that. There's definitely, do I need to be really this closely involved in your research? Although in that case, he made the mistake of saying, "Oh, sex research. Oh, I'll volunteer. I volunteer." And I'm like,
and
okay,
surprisingly, it wasn't what he thought.
What he thought. No, it wasn't what he thought at all. But for Packing for Mars, I had a chapter that had to do. Well, it doesn't matter what it was about. But I was talking to the guy who came up with the rig for turning urine into drinking water, which can be done.
Yeah.
And you will not. I mean, that could be it, and you wouldn't be able to tell. But for the chapter, I thought it would. His name is Sherwin Gormley, which is a great name. I thought I'll go down to NASA Ames and I'll have lunch in the NASA Ames cafeteria with Sherwin Gormley, and at lunch we'll both drink glasses of treated urine. So I didn't use the NASA rig because it's very complicated, but there's a very simple kind of reverse osmosis. It's a kit. Right. It's activated charcoal and a couple of other things, and it's very simple to do.
It's not simply what you'd use for camping. It's more complex than that,
it's
right?
It's a little more time-consuming than that, yeah. But maybe it might be. Anyway,
interesting.
Yeah. So, but I had this, water bottle, in a sort of a designer water bottle, and I put it in that, and Sherwin said, "Keep it cold, okay?" So I put it in the refrigerator, and Ed's like, "What is that?" He didn't drink from it. He said, "What is it?" And I said, "That's my own treated urine." And he's like, "You put it in the refrigerator?" And I said, "But it's actually right now. It's you could even drink that. It's really not. It wouldn't be dangerous. It's like you put it in there. Why didn't you just put it on the deck? It's cold enough that you put it in the refrigerator." And I said, "No, really, you would." And we got into this whole almost like a fight. I'm like, you would drink your own urine if you were in a situation. You would drink that if you didn't have anything else. He said it would have to be apocalyptic.
But it's treated and filtered.
Yeah, but even then, he's like, no, just putting it in the refrigerator.
After these books, after is it 5 or 6?
5.
5. After 5 books, you've written about a lot of weird jobs.
Yeah.
Have you had people come to you who got into their field because they didn't know such a job existed?
I have. You mean because they read the book?
Right.
Yeah. Bunch of kids have written to me saying they got into, they wanted to do forensics because of STIF, which is a little odd to me because there's very little forensics in STIF. There's only actually 1 forensics chapter. Mm-hmm. And then I also feel bad because forensics is pretty repetitive and not as exciting as they may. It's not like, what's CSI?
Right. No,
it's not like that at all. So I feel, but I live for the day when somebody writes to me and says, "God, I read Packing for Mars. I want to be a toilet engineer for NASA." Because I do.
Yes.
What a cool job. Or like I want to be the guy at NASA Ames who figures out how to make the most high fidelity fecal simulant to test the toilets. Like, what? What a cool
Totally.
job.
I would love that job.
Yeah, exactly.
That would-
I would
that would
too.
be
Like,
so-
they're like, we're going to have the right amount of E. coli. We're going to grow our own E. coli. We're going to get the rheological properties just right, because otherwise we're not really doing our job.
Right, right,
but
right.
people are so into their job. I like that. The creativity that goes into a lot of engineering just blows me away. And I think I want to hear from kids, especially girls, saying, I want to become an engineer because of you. I often get, I'm going to med school, or I want to be a forensics person because I read Stiff. I'm like, oh, that's good. But I want to hear from people who are like, I went into engineering because I read Packing for Mars. But I don't hear that. Not so much.
We should have you on. We should have you on MythBusters. Come and help us with something. Because again, when we made the fecal simulant, we had an hour-long discussion amongst ourselves about, well, is it hard or soft?
Yeah.
Do we have to test 4 different kinds? We only have so much time on the show to actually show
and
tests.
if you really dig down in, if you really get in, the more you get into it, the harder, the more complicated it gets. Like that I found this paper, the guy who actually did come up with a simulant, because they started out going, we'll just call the diaper people and see what they use.
Right.
But the diaper people have a whole different set of concerns. They're concerned with leakage,
Moisture-
out the side,
moisture
absorbencies, maybe some staining. I don't know. So they're using pumpkin pie filling, refried beans, brownie mix. That'll do it. But if you're testing the space toilet, and you're talking about surface tension and
everybody
good
has different
separation.
flora.
Yeah, right. So you really, a lot of work went into that. And they tested a bunch of different models, and they have little photographs of them all. And I'm like, I would love that job.
This I think maybe perhaps for me the most mind expanding thing I've come to understand after all the bacteriological testing we've done is that we're just colonies.
Oh, yeah. It's not, there's a guy in Gulp who had this great quote. He said, it's actually sort of a philosophical question of who owns whom.
Right.
He said, and you can't think of them as interlopers or tenants even. It's like they are an organ.
Of you.
Of you.
And
they
you are an organ of them.
And they may even be telling you what to eat and steering you to things that make them happy.
And changing your mood.
And changing your health. And just the way that we've thought of bacteria for so long is so upside down. Yeah.
It's fantastic. I mean, that's really exciting. The idea that, with fecal transplants, I've been following that.
Yeah, the fecal transplant, I mean, that has just taken off. And I mean, when I started Gulp, I remember mentioning what I was going to Minneapolis for, which was to watch, not to have, but to watch. I haven't had one, but to see, to see the whole process, which back then involved an Oster was the company, a blender under a fume hood. It was really just water, shit, nitrogen pumped in because they didn't want oxygen because they're anaerobics. So that was it, under a fume hood. Like some guy who showed up with a bag. Yeah. A paper bag, handed it off at the hospital and said, not my best work.
What did he mean?
I don't know. It looked perfectly good to me.
I had to poop into a bag for the show once, and it's a very undignified, it's difficult.
Yeah, everything about you screams.
Because you don't want to, you need it to be a clean drop.
Yes,
and
right.
In order to do that, figuring out the position of, and it turned out that was the deal. Like you think that you can't see either of your hands that way. You actually have to. Yeah.
Right. They the NASA toilet seats. The reason for they're so expensive, they are designed to spread the cheeks for good separation. So there's less surface tension between the material and the buttocks. So that's why NASA toilet seats are expensive. They are re-engineered to encourage spreading of the cheeks.
Your opening
bit. Clean drop.
Your opening bit in Packing for Mars about how you are the most difficult part of the rocket designer's job.
Exactly.
That completely captured one of my sons. He totally got it.
Yeah.
Oh, right, of course.
Yeah.
We're all so different.
Exactly. And you can't control people that way. You can't make them do things right. I mean, the toilet, I mean, there's a direction card next to the shuttle toilet. It's like 29 steps of what you have to do. There's a rear view mirror. There's so many ways to go wrong, and if you do go wrong, you're the one who has to chase down the shit.
Has Jamie Heineman ever talked to you about his poo desiccating rig on his boat?
No, he's got a desiccator?
Well, no, he lived in the Bahamas for 6 years.
Yeah.
On a sailboat. He was a captain and charter dive master, and obviously dealing with your poop is a thing. And at a certain point, he started to wonder, could I dry it out and desiccate it and more efficiently deal with it that way?
Right.
And he built several iterations.
Kind of like a fruit dryer?
Yeah, it was almost like you were pooping into a frying pan. Right, with fans and everything.
Wow.
And he said, in classic Jamie fashion, well, it worked in its function just fine, but the ancillary problems, i.e. maintaining the fumes and not letting them in the cabin, was eventually my wife put the kibosh on the experimentation process, because any leak at all made the whole place uninhabitable.
Right. In space, you just expose it to the vacuum of space, which it freezes it. It's it does things you can't do on a boat.
Yes.
Yeah, it's an instant freeze dry.
After writing Packing for Mars, how did you feel about Gravity and Interstellar? Are there things about some of those books that make you take you out?
Interstellar I haven't seen.
Oh, okay.
Because I'm not a McConaughey or Hathaway fan. But I've heard, I was kind of torn. I did sort of want to see.
The science is wonderful, and the black hole is beautiful. The exterior shots are gorgeous.
And Gravity, I thought they did a good job with making Gravity and most things fairly realistic.
Feel realistic. That's what Chris Hadfield told me.
I was impressed.
Like.
I mean, I know there were things like, so at the space station, I mean, you wouldn't be able to just drift. Oh, but that I don't care. But the feel of floating in space, grabbing handholds, overshooting, and I remember there's a NASA Johnson Space Center has a device where you learn how to handle a large bulky object in 0G, and it's really lightweight. Like lifting isn't a problem, but pushing it too much, you tend to overshoot and push it, and then it gets going, and you're like, you're trying to get it back. So you have to completely learn how to handle things, including your own body. So that I thought that was depicted nicely, I thought.
We did, I was in Huntsville, Alabama last fall on tour, and my kids were with me. We got a tour of space camp, and they let us go for a scuba dive in their pool. And they've got a 40-foot deep pool.
Yeah, right.
Or a 30-foot deep pool. And one of the things they have in there is a 300-pound sphere that's neutrally buoyant.
Yeah.
And it is shocking to play with, because it's neutrally buoyant. Yeah. And you it's really hard to get it moving, and really hard to stop it. And once it's moving,
you're like, oh, fuck off. It
was very, very cool.
Yeah, it's a wonderful device. They have all kinds of wonderful simulators at Johnson Space Center is just a geek's playground. Yeah. I
haven't been. I've always wanted to go.
Johnson Space Center.
You guys got to go. These guys got to go.
Yeah.
Mary, thank you so much for coming on The Talking Room.
Oh, thanks for having me in here.